The impact of stigma, brief encounters. Introduction. Stigma surrounding disability is a pervasive issue in our society. Even well-meaning individuals can inadvertently contribute to this problem through their actions and words. This piece examines a brief encounter that highlights the subtle ways in which stigma manifests in everyday interactions. The encounter. Picture this scene. It's just another day in a typical neighborhood. A person with a severe disability is exiting their flat, ready to start their day. As they emerge, their neighbor catches sight of them and calls out a greeting. "All right, do I want some assistance over the road?" The response is simple and direct. No thank you." Unpacking the interaction. At first glance, this exchange might seem unremarkable, even considerate. However, it reveals several underlying assumptions and biases. Assumption of helplessness. The neighbor immediately offers assistance, implying that the person with a disability cannot cross the road independently. Unsolicited help. The offer of assistance, while well-intentioned, was not requested and could be seen as intrusive. Lack of consideration for individual capabilities. The neighbor's question doesn't take into account the person's actual abilities or needs. The impact of such interactions. While this encounter was brief, it represents a common experience for many people with disabilities. These seemingly small interactions can have significant cumulative effects. Reinforcement of stereotypes. Each such interaction reinforces societal assumptions about the limitations of people with disabilities. Emotional toll. Constantly having to assert one's independence can be exhausting and frustrating. Barrier to inclusion. Such attitudes can create invisible barriers to full participation in society. Moving forward. To create a more inclusive society, we need to be mindful of our assumptions and actions. Here are some steps we can take. Respect autonomy. Always assume capability unless told otherwise. Ask before offering help. If you think someone might need assistance, ask if they would like help rather than assuming. Educate ourselves. Learn about the experiences of people with disabilities to better understand their perspectives and needs. Conclusion. This brief encounter serves as a reminder of the subtle ways stigma can manifest in our daily lives. By being more aware of our assumptions and actions, we can work towards creating a society that truly respects and includes all individuals, regardless of their abilities. As he reached the road, two young girls passing by started laughing loudly, their eyes fixed on him. Their blatant amusement at his condition was a fresh wound to his already battered confidence. Though they were young, their behavior demonstrated a clear need for education and empathy. The man felt a pang of sadness, not just for himself, but for a society that failed to teach its youth the value of kindness and understanding. Approaching the traffic lights, the man's ordeal continued. A young man walked past him, then suddenly rushed back. Without a word, he brushed past the struggling man to press the pedestrian crossing button. Thank ya, the man muttered, his voice barely audible. But internally, he was thinking, there's no need for that. The well-intentioned young man walked on, head held high, likely feeling proud of his meaningful help in the community. The irony wasn't lost on the struggling man. He hadn't even intended to cross the road. This unsolicited assistance, while coming from a place of kindness, felt utterly insulting. Yet, he felt compelled to remain outwardly grateful, aware of the societal expectation to appreciate any form of help, regardless of its appropriateness or necessity. As he continued his journey, the man's mind, already taxed by his condition, grappled with these conflicting emotions. The genuine desire to be thankful clashed with the feeling of being patronized and misunderstood. These mixed agendas, the helper's need to assist and the help need for dignity, stirred confusion in his already injured mind. With each step, the man carried not just the weight of his physical condition, but also the burden of society's misguided perceptions and actions. He longed for a world where people could see beyond his disability, where help was offered with discretion and accepted without obligation, where his autonomy was respected as much as his potential need for assistance. As the day drew to a close, the man realized that his greatest struggle wasn't with his disability, but with navigating a world that seemed ill-equipped to understand and accommodate it. He hoped for a future where education and empathy would bridge the gap between intention and impact, where people like him could move through the world without constantly being reminded of their differences. Until then, he would continue his journey, one misunderstood, yet resilient, step at a time. Just after the lights, on the very same road, approaching the level crossing, a man stumbled forward, his gait unsteady. The street lamps cast long shadows, distorting his silhouette against the pavement. As he neared the crossing, a woman looked up, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. She quickly averted her gaze, shaking her head in what appeared to be disapproval or concern. Without warning, the woman rushed across the busy main road, narrowly avoiding the oncoming traffic. Her hasty departure felt like another insult to the man, though one that remained unspoken. He couldn't help but wonder if she had mistaken him for a drunkard, stumbling home after a night of excess. The man felt a twinge of shame, even though he knew he wasn't intoxicated. It was just another misunderstanding, another judgment passed too quickly. He wanted to call out, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he watched as the woman disappeared into the night, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As he continued his journey, the man couldn't shake the feeling of being an outcast in his own neighborhood. The woman's reaction had stirred something within him, a mixture of frustration and sadness that he struggled to suppress. He wondered how many others saw him the same way, making assumptions based on a fleeting glance. Later that day, the man found himself hobbling into town. His progress was slow and laborious, each step a reminder of his unseen struggle. As he made his way along the bustling streets, a cacophony of car horns erupted around him. At first, he thought they were directed at him in anger or impatience, but as he glanced around, he saw smiling faces behind the windshields. In a moment of clarity, a fleeting thought crossed his mind, "They think me drunk." But his injured cognition couldn't hold on to this reasoning for long. Instead, his mind, already battered by unseen wounds, interpreted these actions as further insults. Each honk, each smile, felt like a fresh barb, digging deeper into his fragile psyche. His injured emotions, unable to process these interactions rationally, began to compound. Every perceived slight added another layer to his growing sense of alienation. The man's mind, already struggling with some unnamed trauma or condition, twisted these everyday occurrences into something darker, more sinister. This cycle of misinterpretation and emotional turmoil was a stark illustration of how prevalent social conditioning affects certain individuals. The man, with his visible difficulty in movement and his unseen mental struggles, became a canvas upon which others projected their assumptions. And in turn, his injured mind painted these projections with the dark colors of his own inner turmoil. As the day wore on, the man's hobbling gait became more pronounced, his inner distress manifesting in his physical movements. He was caught in a cruel feedback loop. The more distressed he became, the more his physical symptoms showed, and the more attention he drew from passers-by. Each glance, each horn, each smile only served to reinforce his feelings of otherness, of being misunderstood and misjudged. In this moment, the man was not just battling his physical limitations or his cognitive injuries. He was fighting against the weight of societal expectations, the quick judgments of strangers, and the invisible barriers that separate those who fit neatly into social norms from those who don't. His struggle was a poignant reminder of the often unseen battles fought by those living with disabilities or mental health issues in a world that isn't always equipped to understand or accommodate them. After his arduous journey through town, the man found himself in the foyer of a building. He had nearly stumbled down an escalator, his balance precarious and his movements uncertain. As he approached the exit, relief washed over him at the thought of finally leaving this gauntlet of public scrutiny. However, his relief was short-lived. A woman, who was just about to exit, caught sight of him. In what she likely thought was a considerate gesture, she stood to attention, fully opening the door and holding it. The man's heart sank as he realized he was still about 100 meters away from the exit. The woman's actions, while well-intentioned, only served to draw more unwanted attention to the man. Other people in the foyer turned to look, curious about what had prompted such an exaggerated act of courtesy. The man felt their eyes on him, assessing, wondering, perhaps even pitying. As he slowly made his way towards the exit, each step feeling like an eternity under the weight of all those stares, the man reflected on the complexities of social interactions. he understood that the woman was trying to be considerate, but her overzealous attempt at helpfulness had the opposite effect. It made him feel singled out, different, a spectacle for others to observe. The man wished for a world where courtesy could exist without drawing unnecessary attention. Where holding a door for someone about to exit or enter was a simple, unremarkable act. Where people didn't feel the need to go to extremes when they saw someone who appeared to be struggling. He longed for a balance between consideration and respect for personal space and dignity. As he finally reached the door, mumbling a quiet thank you to the woman, the man couldn't help but think about how such interactions affected people like him. Those with invisible disabilities or chronic conditions that affected their mobility or behavior. He wished people understood that sometimes, the kindest act was to treat everyone with the same casual courtesy, regardless of their perceived abilities or disabilities. Stepping out into the open air, the man took a deep breath. Another day navigated, another series of misunderstandings and well-meaning but misguided actions endured. He hoped that someday, society would learn to strike a balance between helpfulness and respect for individual dignity. Until then, he would continue his journey, one misunderstood step at a time. But his ordeal was not yet over. Outside the very same exit, he stumbled again, still flustered from the previous interaction. A man nearby saw this and approached, his eyes glinting with a predatory look that the struggling man recognized all too well. "Oh, careful, mate," the stranger said, his voice dripping with false concern. Then, without missing a beat, he switched gears. "Why ain't got a cigarette, have why? I got an emergency, I need money for the train. Lend us some money, will why?" The audacity of the request shocked the struggling man. It was clear that this opportunist had seen his vulnerability and immediately sought to exploit it for personal gain. The realization hit him hard. Not only did he have to contend with well-meaning but misguided attempts at help, but also with those who saw his condition as an opportunity for exploitation. In that moment, the man felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at being targeted, sadness at the state of society where such behavior was commonplace, and a deep, overwhelming fatigue. It seemed that every step of his journey was fraught with challenges, not just from his own condition, but from a world that either misunderstood him or sought to take advantage of him. As he mumbled a quiet "no, sorry" and tried to move past the opportunistic stranger, the man couldn't help but reflect on the spectrum of human behavior he'd encountered in just one day. From those who avoided him out of discomfort, to those who tried to help but only caused more distress, to those who saw his struggle as an opportunity for exploitation, it was a microcosm of society's treatment of the vulnerable. With each unsteady step away from the building, the man silently yearned for a world where people could see beyond the surface, where compassion didn't come at the cost of dignity, and where vulnerability wasn't seen as an invitation for exploitation. But for now, he would continue his journey, navigating not just his own personal challenges, but the complex and often misguided reactions of those around him.